Dark Star.
The Dark Star 11. What the hell is that thing? Nancy whispered frantically, looking over at Michael as they cowered behind the wall while the robot methodically and slowly scanned the room, its motorized wheels making an electronic whir with every rotation. It's gotta be some kind of sentry bot. Hang on, he replied as he reached into his back pocket to pull out the hacking device. He opened the case with shaking fingers, the sound of the red-eyed robot getting closer. Michael closed his eyes and took a deep breath, focusing his eyes on the device. His fingers scrolled down the screen where he saw the option scan and he tapped the button. Scanning for nearby devices, the screen blinked for a few moments before turning dark blue. Device found, security bot level 1, begin hack. Y/N the display said, and Michael quickly tapped the Y button, and on the screen appeared a small maze, like you'd see in a coloring book as a child, with a blinking dot at one end and a glowing blue dot at the other. At the bottom of the screen was a symbol with 4 arrows, up, down, left and right. He tapped the right arrow and the first cursor began moving through the maze. As it came to the first turn, he pressed the left arrow and the cursor turned the corner, just missing the edge. The blinking cursor slowly made its way between the lines on the screen and he tapped right just a little too late to make the turn, and the cursor disappeared into the wall of the maze. First attempt failure. 2 attempts remaining before the device self-destructs. The screen on the device blinked. Try again, Y/N. So what happens if that thing blows up in here? Nancy asked, whispering over his shoulder. I don't think that would be good. At all. But we can't stay here. I got this, and Michael tapped Y on the device to try again. He maneuvered the cursor carefully through the maze, tapping up, then left, then right, then down, watching it as it approached each turn in the maze and timing it perfectly until the cursor disappeared into the blue orb at the other end of the maze. Sentry bot level 1, hack complete, disable Y/N. He tapped the Y as fast as he could and the robot suddenly announced, diagnostic mode entered, powering down systems, and he looked up at Nancy. I think that did it, he said, standing up slowly and carefully and peeking around the corner. The sentry bot was on the far side of the room, halfway around the table, with its head facing down and its eyes a pale green. Nancy came around the corner and looked the room over. It looked like a kitchen from a 1960s TV show. There was even an old-style refrigerator in the corner with a stainless steel handle and light blue shag carpet. She walked over to take a closer look at the robot and saw that it was an almost replica of Rosie the robot from the Jetsons. Except this Rosie had 2 spiked coils for hands that did not look like they were made for folding laundry. It looks dangerous, but it's also kind of comical, right? A 60s kitchen made up like the Jetsons with Killer Rosie as the maid, she said, examining the details of the robot's face. Her mouth had a square shape, almost as if it was riveted together, and there were 2 radio antennas sticking out of each side of her head for ears. I guess that's easy to say now, Michael said, approaching the robot cautiously. When it's not hunting us down with those spiked hands and glowing red eyes of hers. What's that? Nancy asked, pointing at the kitchen counter where there was a toaster with a folded piece of paper under it. She walked over, picked up the toaster and pulled out the yellow paper, holding it under the light from above. Hey, check this out, she said, calling over to Michael. He walked over and stood next to her while they both read the letters together.
Dossier, David Elvin Adam Bender. Traits, avoids people, hates animals, loves M&Ms. Childhood, David was a nice boy, his mother loved him. In school, he loathed sports but excelled in mathematics. He seldom caused any problems, at least none with global consequences. At home, David spent most of his time on the computer, and this did not prove harmful to anyone either. Well, there was the time David hacked his phone company's computer system and changed the records. Angry at his parents for some real or imagined crime, the playful youngster added a long-distance call to their monthly bill. A 5.5-hour call to Tokyo, Japan. Turning point, he had become obsessed with a new computer game called Giggling Penguin Invaders from Outer Space in the vicinity of Ursa Minor. David had always hated penguins from Ursa Minor. The score's counter went up to 100 billion and he was determined to max it out. After playing the game for several days without sleep, he had vaporized enough penguins to reach 99,999,999,795 points. One more tuxedoed avian and he'd have it. David shook out his joystick hand. A 250-point penguin waddled onto the screen. David's eyes lit up. He took aim. And then, at that precise moment, the power failed. David's game was lost. In that moment something snapped in David's mind. He was consumed with one single maniacal obsession: he would repay the world for the injustice it had done him. Intelligence report. David's stronghold, using a fortune he amassed by raiding the computer systems of various financial institutions. David constructed a vast, underground stronghold packed with computer equipment. There, in seclusion, David spent 4 years working to breach the security of military computers installations around the world. If you are here now, that means he has succeeded. Our computers estimate that he will break the launch codes and trigger the missile attacks in exactly 6 hours. This is the amount of time you will have to complete this mission. David's stronghold has 32 rooms. Some of them are used as living quarters and others are computer rooms. Our intelligence indicates that David uses 3 types of security codes. One code deactivates the robots, another operates the lifts, and a third code unlocks the control room. Now comes the strange part. We believe that David hides the passwords in his furniture. David, who is extremely absent-minded, frequently forgets the passwords for his security computer. His solution is to scatter them haphazardly around the rooms. You can find some of the passwords in the sofa, or in the stereo, or the candy machine. Without these passwords you will die here. Good luck, Belladonna.
They stared at the pages in Nancy's hand in stunned silence. It was almost comical. If the stakes weren't so high, they could almost laugh at the pages they were staring at. Well, I'm glad to see that Belladonna has a sense of humor about all of this, Michael quipped, looking around the room. We should see if there are any clues here in this room, he said, opening and looking inside the refrigerator, its heavy door creaking as he swung it open. I'll check over here, Nance said, and went to the bookcase on the wall, searching up and down through the shelves. Nothing over here. Anything in the fridge? She asked, and they both burst out laughing at the ridiculousness of it. Nothing, not even an old jar of pickles, he said, trying to hold back the laughter when an announcement came over the speakers. Hunter drone deployed to Sector 4. Hunter drone deployed to Sector 4, and the color of the room turned a shade of crimson. That does not sound good. Do we even know what sector we are in? Nancy asked, looking over at Michael. No clue, but I think we should get the hell out of this room and try and figure it out, he said, and they headed towards the double doors of the exit. It opened with a swoosh as they approached. Past the doorway was a long tunnel with another double door at the end and walls that looked to be made of solid steel. The floor was carpeted with a dark gray tight-knit carpet that felt soft under their feet. As they approached the second set of doors, they opened automatically, revealing a darkened room glowing from a black light disco ball high above them. There were drones flying around the room, and up above, on a platform halfway up the wall, was a couch, lamp, and a stack of books on a coffee table. How the hell do we get up there? Nancy asked, looking up at the platform high above them. Michael stared at the drones buzzing around the room. They had 4 rotors and a small round camera mounted in the middle. On each wing was a small, round device that looked like a grenade. I'm more worried about those things, he said, pointing up at the drones. Pretty sure those are grenades on their wings. Fuck, Nancy said, looking up at the air above them. What's your hacking device say? Michael pulled the device from his pocket and opened up the case, looking down at the screen, scanning for devices. On the screen the menu opened, showing 2 options, Sentry Drones and Reset Lift. He clicked the Sentry Drone icon and a new puzzle opened on the screen. This time there was a series of numbers on the screen with symbols next to them. Each symbol looked like an ancient Egyptian hieroglyph. At the bottom of the screen was a red box that said Target 3823. He stared at the numbers on the screen. He couldn't see how they possibly could add up to 3,823 until he clicked one of the symbols and it was multiplied by some large number. The total at the bottom of the screen said 1864, and he looked closely at the symbols and numbers. He clicked the third one and the total was now 2784. He clicked the middle and it was 4,298. There was no rhyme or reason to it that he could see. Suddenly a timer appeared on the screen, counting down from 5 minutes, 4 minutes, and 59. 58. Shit, I've never been any good at math, Michael said, showing the device to Nancy. He looked closely and took the device in her hands. I was always really good at mental calculation, she said as she clicked the buttons on the screen for a few moments and handed it over to Michael. Think that did it, she said triumphantly. He looked down at the screen and the box around the target was green and just below it now had an icon that said disable and Michael tapped the button. The drones around the room slowly landed, each of them coming down softly on the ground. That was incredible. How did you figure it out? He asked, looking at her impressively. I'm not really sure. I've always just been good at math. I really can't explain it, she replied, shrugging her shoulders. So how do we get up there? She said, pointing at the platform up above. Let me try resetting the lift. Do you see where it is? He asked, looking down at the screen while Nancy searched around the room for anything that looked like an elevator. When he clicked the reset lift icon, a new puzzle opened up and he was staring at a group of 5 words that seemed scrambled. Within each group of letters, one square was red with a diamond shape around it. It's like one of those old jumble puzzles in the newspaper, he said. I used to do these when I was a kid. Michael stared at the letters, trying to figure out the first word. I think the second word is heave, Nancy said, glancing down at the screen. Michael used his index finger to rearrange the letters on the screen, and when it spelled heave, the box turned green. 1 down and 4 to go. He looked back at the first word, rearranging them in his mind, and came up with wildly, which as soon as he moved the letter into place it also turned green. They studied the words one by one, the red boxes turning to green as they put the final letters in place. The screen went blue and a square icon appeared saying, Reset Lift. Y/N, and he tapped the Y button. From the ceiling high above, a square silver platform came floating down as if defying gravity itself. What the hell? Nancy exclaimed, watching as the platform slowly came down to the floor, touching down for a moment, and then it began slowly rising back up into the air. Oh shit, Michael said, running across the room and leaping onto the platform, landing hard on his chest as the platform kept steadily rising. He stood up and looked up at the upper level where the couch was, trying to time his jump. As the elevator approached level with the floor, he jumped off, stumbling and landing on the couch, almost knocking over the lamp next to it. He looked down at the floor, holding the stem of the lamp, and saw a yellow envelope sticking out from under the base. I think I found something, he said, calling down to Nancy, who stood looking up at him from below. He bent down, moved the lamp to the side, and pulled the envelope out. It was sealed and crumpled at the edges, so he slid his fingernail under the fold and slowly tore it open, revealing a piece of musical sheet music with a single line of musical composition. You wouldn't know how to read music, would you? He yelled down to Nancy, who was still craning her neck looking up at him. I haven't looked at sheet music in years, but I played flute in high school. The bigger question is, how are you going to get down without breaking your back? Michael stared at the floor below him. It was at least a 20 or 25-foot drop. He reached into his back pocket for the hacking device, scrolled through the menu and found the reset lift icon and tapped it. The silvery lift again floated down, and as soon as it was close enough, he jumped across the open air, his heart fluttering for a moment before he landed, and he caught his balance as the lift continued its descent down to the floor. He stepped off just as it reached the bottom and handed the paper over to Nancy, who looked at it with a focused eye, studying the notes and humming to herself. It looks like the beginning of Ba Ba Black Sheep But I'm not sure without seeing more of the notes, she said and handed the paper back to Michael, who folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. I guess that's the exit, she said and pointed toward the yellow double door on the far side of the room. Guess we are going to find out, Michael said, wondering what surprises would be behind the yellow door. They approached the door, and once they were a few feet away it slid open and another long hallway sat before them, this time with white carpeting and a black door at the far end. They stepped into the tunnel and cautiously made their way to the door ahead. The doors opened as they approached, and within the next room was what looked like a recreation room, with a volleyball net set up in the middle, for ping-pong tables on the right side of the room and a tetherball in the middle. It looks like my old school's gym, Michael said, looking around the room when 3 doors on the far side of the room opened and 3 heavily armored bots rolled into the room on double tracks, with 2 massive machine guns on each shoulder and glowing red eyes. Destroy them, my robots, the demonic voice from above called out, and all 3 turned towards them, their red eyes darting like lasers across the room before the room exploded in a fury of gunfire, and they both took cover behind the bleachers. Oh my God, he yelled while the barrage of bullets pinged off the metal of the bleachers, shaking them like an earthquake. Can you hack them? Nancy asked, kneeling as low on the floor as her knees would allow, and Michael dug in his back pocket for the hacking device, ripping it out as quickly as he could. Give me a second, he said and began scanning for devices, begging the device to work. Come on, as the whir of the robot's treads got closer and closer. The screen flashed devices found Battle Droid Level 2, each of the 3 with their own hacking icon. Shit, I'll never get all 3 hacked in time, he said, looking desperately over at Nancy. Can you get control of one of them and use it against the others? She asked, raising her eyebrows at him. Not sure, but it's worth a shot at this point, he said as another volley of machine gun fire ripped across the wall above them, sending chunks of concrete splashing down on them, and he clicked on the first icon, bringing up the options. The second choice was remote access, so he tapped that, and the same maze from before came up on the screen, but this time the cursor moved faster and the maze was more complicated. He carefully maneuvered around the maze, timing each turn as carefully as he could, and after a nail-biting moment where he almost hit the maze wall on the final turn, he watched as the cursor disappeared into the blue orb. On the screen there was now what looked like an old Atari game with the same arrows for moving the miniature tank on the screen, and next to that was a red button he assumed meant fire. There were 2 other tanks on the screen, so he turned his tank's turret towards the first one and tapped the red button. The room erupted with the sounds of machine gun fire and metal tearing as the hack drone ripped apart the other. There was the sound of squealing electric motors as he tapped the button and maneuvered the hack tank toward the other when it began firing again. He glanced around the corner and saw the remaining tank had turned and was blasting his with all of its firepower, its left track getting shredded in the process. He turned the turret toward the tank and hit the red button one more time, and as the hacked bot tipped over it fired and ripped the other tank in half. They both sat quiet in a pile of smoking metal as the smell of gunpowder lingered in the air. Nancy stood up and walked out from behind the bleachers, staring in awe at the scene before her. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline and her ears were ringing from the echoing gunfire. That was insane, she said and looked back at Michael, who folded the hacking device and put it back in his pocket. That was something for sure, he said, walking up towards the robots and looking around the room. Let's see if we can find any clues before any more of these guys show up, he said, and they began looking around the room.